So just to give a quick review, this is our third empathy circle on the question of what is our experience in the empathy circle. So we're just sort of exploring that topic. And see, are we doing time? Let's see, maybe we could do, let's keep time. Maybe.
Yeah, I was keeping time last time.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that again.
Okay.
People
Should
would
we try a little bit longer, like 6 minutes or so?
Okay.
And so we can get started. Whoever would like to get started, whatever's alive for you on that topic or anything else, ideally the topic, but so yeah, who wants to start? I'll get started then, speak to Lou.
Okay.
So the experience in the empathy circle, one thing I've been finding is that because I'm usually doing the organizing, that I don't feel I can let myself go in the empathy circle, like fully just kind of be in the present with it. I always feel like I'm kind of doing this management of it, trying to keep an eye on everything. And so that's just something I've noticed, that I think it keeps part of my awareness, part of my consciousness, just from sort of being in the total present moment.
Yeah, so you're saying that something that you've noticed about yourself is that if you are facilitating the empathy circle or organizing it, that there's a part of you that is conscious of that and observing that, and is and that you feel like that prevents you from fully relaxing and being in the circle fully.
Yeah, and I find myself wanting to sort of listen more deeply, and I feel like I'm not growing in terms of getting better at the listening. I feel like I sort of hit sort of a plateau, and I'm just like, oh, how do I listen more deeply? And I'm just sort of sitting with that question, and yeah, just sort of wanting to explore that more, like how to listen. It's sort of the felt experience of listening better. There's a, I can sense it. I feel like because of all the organization, I'm sort of in my, I don't like to use the word head, but I'm sort of in the thought process, thinking, instead of like a full-bodied listening that I think I'd like to get better at.
Yeah, so you're saying that another thing that you're aware of is that you would like to be able to deepen your capacity to listen more fully, and that uh, that's something you've been thinking about, and something that a question that you've been sitting with is how do I listen more deeply and more fully to the person? And an element that goes into that is that thing that you were saying about organizing and facilitating, that keeps you a little bit in your thinking mind, and you're wondering if that prevents, or you're thinking that that prevents you some from uh, feeling into what the person's saying completely.
Yes, I have been doing a lot of experimentation or around like, oh, how do we listen more deeply? And there's ideas I have, like I've seen videos of Rogers doing empathic listening, and he started doing, I don't know what these tenses are, but there's like I don't know if it's first person singular, where you reflect back as if you're the person saying the same thing. So it's like, oh, I'm feeling upset, and then the reflection is oh, I'm feeling upset. So I don't know if that's first person singular or whatever of the reflection, but I've noticed that he started sprinkling that in his reflections. So you're reflecting like, oh, I understand you're saying this, but then reflecting back also first, as if you're that person saying this thing, whatever they said.
Yeah, so you think maybe one aspect of listening to people more deeply or more fully might be something that you saw Carl Rogers doing, which is in a demonstration tape, which is reflecting back in first person as if you are the person uh, uh, saying the experience that you are getting from them.
Yeah, and then there's other things is the, I don't know what this is called, but like it's like, oh, I hear you saying this, but we could be speaking from a we, like, oh, we are feeling this, and then the reflection is we are feeling this. So you're shifting the framing of where you're speaking from. Instead of I am experiencing this, we are experiencing this, and the reflection is a we too. So there's all kinds of things we could be experimenting about. So, and I just kind of wonder, what would, and I've done that before where I actually practiced the we, and people got freaked out by it. It was like, well, this is too spacey. This is like, I'm losing my sense of self or something. And they got, I thought it was really interesting because it shifts the sense of, oh, it's me and you. It's like us reflecting ourselves, it's so, and you just kind of, I just wonder what that does to the energy. And so there's a lot of sort of experimentation that I can imagine, but I just not really getting to it.
Yeah, so one thing that you've thought about doing and you've actually experimented with a little bit is instead of saying I, saying we when you're doing a reflection, which is an attempt to acknowledge that what's happening is going on between the two people. And so you've experimented with that, and the times that you've done it, people have kind of freaked out about it.
Yeah.
And said that they're kind of losing their sense of self. But you think that might be something to experiment with more, as well as other. You're curious about other ways to experiment with listening.
Yeah, for the sense of going deeper, how do you have a deeper experience? And so that's sort of the intention there, making it a deeper, yeah. So I feel heard if that was the right
Thanks.
time.
Yeah, so you just are really curious about ways of deepening the
Yep,
experience of listening.
fully
Okay,
heard, thanks.
great. Okay, I'll go to Shannon. Well, this is a really interesting area to explore, and it actually is a question that has come up a lot recently in the Empathy Circle Facilitators group. Is how do you listen more deeply? What does it mean to listen more deeply, and not just to reflect back like the words of what someone says?
So you're recognizing that this is an interesting kind of direction the conversation's heading, and something that's come up in the facilitators group about like how to listen more deeply, not just parrot back the words.
Yeah, and I'm aware. I mean, my first thoughts are, the NVC training that I've had in listening for feelings, information, feelings, and need what they call needs, which I also say is desire, values. I use those kind of words interchangeably. And certainly my understanding of that and my consciousness about those elements is a very powerful tool that I use in terms of sensing people and reflecting people.
You've gone through a training that's kind of uh, NVC training, or
Nonviolent communication training.
NVC training that kind of specifically speaks to listening at these different levels of like feelings, thoughts, and then like needs, or which could also map onto desires. And that's been really helpful for you to think of it like that.
Yeah, and I resist the idea of levels. I think of elements because levels always implies hierarchy, and like some people say, it's more, this is more better to listen this way than that way, and different people actually are ready for different things, and so I like to think of them as elements rather than levels.
Mm. So you're specifying that these are just elements or parts rather than like levels, because levels insinuates there's a hierarchy to it.
Right. Um, and I would say that, so Marshall Rosenberg, the inventor of NVC, says, and I really agree with this, that, in our culture, we tend to think that reflecting the feelings is the most important thing. And he says that reflecting the meaning to the person, meaning the needs or the values or the desires, that's actually the most important thing. And it's about an 80-20 thing. That people really want to be understood for the meaning, and the feelings aren't unimportant. That they're important too. And I guess it also might be true that different people might have a different priority on that, or they might have a different priority in a different moment. Some moment, a person might feel that having their feelings understood is more important than anything else.
Mm. So you're saying that mostly we assume in our society that feelings are the most important thing to reflect, and yet there's work that's been done on this, and findings or theory that suggests that meaning is actually the most important thing to grasp in the listening process. And it's split like at an 80-20 almost. And so you're just thinking of that, I think.
Yeah, and then also the piece that it might be true that some people have a different value priority, like they want to be most understood for their feelings and not for their needs. And it could be that I think that the needs are important because that meaning happens to be important to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're further specifying that like there's maybe different people have different priorities in terms of how they need to be heard. And feelings might be important in certain moments, more so than others. Yeah.
Yeah. I also want to just comment on what Edwin said about using we instead of I. And I actually have a pretty strong reaction to that, because I think one of the breakdowns in communication is when people communicate for other people. Like they don't say I, they say we, and they're really talking about what they experience. And so I think it's an important boundary thing that people speak for themselves and not for others, because everybody experiences things. Each person has their own experience.
So you were going back to something you heard Edwin say about speaking as the speaker in terms of we rather than I. And you're saying that you think it's actually quite important for someone to speak just for themselves, because there's like a boundary that can be crossed if they start using in the we pronoun, I guess, in speaking for the other person.
Yeah, and I also think that using we or they is a way of distancing oneself from one's own experience, like not really being willing to connect with and say, this is what I'm experiencing and this is what I feel. And it's definitely true that it's possible to have shared experience, meaning this is what I feel and what I'm experiencing, and then the other person can say, well, I'm experiencing that too. Okay, so it seems like we're experiencing the same thing. But I think it's important for a person to speak for themselves and not for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's sort of a way of distancing to use like we and they pronouns. And so it's definitely true that there could be a shared experience, but if that's the case, like let that be kind of agreed upon in the other person's own time, rather than speaking for them and assuming that they agree. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for hearing me so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Selene? Thank you. I think you're muted, but I gathered that you agreed. Yeah, I love part of my research has been on boundaries, so I really gravitate towards, and my mind gets sticky around that topic of boundaries, because I find it I find it really interesting. Why do I find it so interesting? I think it's at the root of a lot of misunderstandings. I think it plays a huge role in empathy, and probably in the empathy circle. So I'll just start there. Yeah.
So you're enjoying this topic because you've done a lot of research on boundaries, and the topic is interesting to you because it's the root of a lot of misunderstandings, you think, and it plays a part in all communication, and particularly you mentioned the empathy circles where you think the issue of boundaries is significant.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know exactly how it could play into the empathy circle per se, but with empathy itself, it's amazing how empathy can feel so good that you're like resonating with someone like, oh, I get it, and it's amazing how actually wrong you can be. And so that's kind of what's convinced me that the damage that you can do by assuming it has, and I didn't realize it actually, probably part of what I learned over the past 10 years. That's kind of part of the lesson about the importance of boundaries in empathy, is kind of realizing that, wow, actually you can be wrong and not realize it when you actually think you get it the most, in moments where you think you get the other person the most. It's humbling.
So you found over time and in your studies and your experience that empathy can feel so good that somebody can imagine they're really getting the other person. I really get you, and they're totally wrong. And so you're wondering, does this play out also in the empathy circles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not trying to, I don't want to make it sound like that, there's something dangerous about that, because I think there's something actually really beautiful in having that feeling as a listener, that you get it. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. But it was just surprising to me to learn that, humility is so important in this process, in any empathic type of process, because even when it feels right, it could be very wrong. So a little bit of a repetition, but I guess
So
it
you
brings
don't,
humility in. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry.
No worries.
So this piece about feeling like I really get somebody can be so wonderful, but it can be also a little dangerous. But you don't want to say that it's wrong. It's just there's a value in use the word humility, and not assuming that my thinking that I really get you is truly what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it occurs to me, like in kind of reflecting on the elements of listening that Lou was talking about, that you could actually really 100% understand, or if that were possible, you could very accurately get the feeling behind what someone was saying and totally miss the meaning. Like you could just give your own meaning to it. And so that could actually, even though you really got a certain element, you totally missed another. And so, what does that leave the speaker with? I'm kind of thinking out loud, but.
So you're exploring this idea of the elements of listening that Lou had mentioned, and imagining that we can feel like we really get somebody's feelings, for example, and yet we're missing something else, some other meaning that they're trying to convey.
Yeah, like, is that a moment? You got it exactly, but and I wonder if that's a moment where projection, like, I got the feeling, and I remember the last time I felt that way, and I was like here, and so I'm gonna perseverate on that, and then then the speaker ends up feeling like, well, that's not what I was taught. That wasn't my experience. I wonder what that was about. And really, it was because it was our experience of having that same feeling. So, yeah.
So you're looking at how, in listening and maybe hearing a feeling that the listener really identifies with, that it can be a moment of projection and thinking that when I felt that, all of these other things. And so the speaker, surely this is true for the speaker as well, and can be really off track.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I feel heard.
Edwin, would you listen to me, please?
Listening.
So I am interested in this subject of different experiences of listening in the empathy circles. And particularly, as you mentioned, your experience while you are managing the experience for everybody, how present can you really be, and what is that is like for you?
So this aspect of listening is interesting to you, and also what I was saying about the management, how present can you be if you're sort of having to manage the circle or cafe?
And I had a mini experience of that doing the 4 lessons with a Spanish-speaking group, in which I didn't take all of the elements seriously enough, and found myself in moments of listening to somebody and then realizing, oh my gosh, did I decide how many minutes we're going to do the circles for? So, and watching that process, because, I've had a lot of experience in life and moments where that truly happens in life, where there are several equally important things going on.
Yeah, so you had some experience with that, with doing your Spanish training that you were doing, where you were having to juggle all the different parts of it, and how you had to, and kind of a little bit of, sounds like I'm hearing some fear and anxiety, like, oh, am I doing all the things I need to be doing?
Yeah, and yet with the main thing being that I wanted to demonstrate being fully present to somebody, because so that that's what I wanted them to learn, and they were very forgiving.
So you wanted to really show that you were present with someone, and it sounds like you weren't, because you were thinking about other things too, but they were very forgiving of your lack of full presence.
Yes. So this piece about presence and the different ways that we can be present is interesting to me. And I have noticed in different empathy circles, the different amounts of investment that I have in each exchange. And sometimes, there's so much focus in just trying to understand what this person is trying to say. It may be coming from a different culture and language, or and then others where there seems to be a very copacetic, let's say, where there's an easy flow and I really get it, and want to plunge into, let's go deeper. So the empathy circles has given me an opportunity to notice something that in my ordinary life I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to.
So you see this as a matter of being present with someone. You mentioned that before. The presence is an important part to you, and this is an opportunity to sort of notice how your presence, the state of your presence in the empathy circle. You're able to see kind of how that presence sort of manifests or changes, or
and I worked with this with the Spanish-speaking group, because the question came up about how do you not lose yourself and also don't stay too distant. And I talked about how in mediation practice, one of the things I learned was to monitor my position on the chair, so that I know where I am, based on my physicality. And am I really close and getting into their lives too much? Or am I back here because I really am not enjoying this? So the issue of presence for me brings in a lot of different aspects, like the physicality.
Mm-hmm. So it's really around presence. Are you being really present with someone, or are you sort of withdrawn for someone, or are you sort of in the middle? And you've done that with mediation. It sounds like you try to be sort of in the middle between, in terms of level of presence.
Yeah, thank you. Did I hear your thing, Lou? I'm sorry.
No, no,
Not yet.
sorry.
Okay. All right. I'll go on a little longer. Yeah. So there's a self-awareness, awareness of, like I said, the physicality. How am I feeling in my body in this moment? That can give me clues of, am I getting lost here? Going into some of what Shannon was saying, not my business, I'm projecting, or am I more where I want to be, where I can be receptive, and that maybe there's a balance between the presence of the two people who are the speaker and the listener.
So you've been monitoring your sense of presence. How are you present, and are you too close, too far? And so you're sort of like, you've been very observant of your own sense of presence. I think there was more too. I don't know if there was something I think I missed there, but
Good enough for now. Thank you
good
for
enough.
listening to me, Edwin.
Okay, then I speak to Shannon. Yeah, I liked what Selene is saying about presence, because I sort of monitor my felt experience too. Like I sort of have this 360-degree space of felt experience, and I try to sort of be aware of what's happening in that space. Like, where's my attention? Where's my awareness? And what's happening? What feelings are coming up in this space?
You appreciate this topic of presence, and that you yourself do focus on presence when you're in the process of active listening. It's like 360-degree space around you, and where is your attention within that space, type of thing.
Yeah, and what are the feelings? It's so for me, it's almost like a landscape, a felt experience landscape, and there seems to be different parts of the landscape or different feelings that sort of float and change and move, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like what are exactly the feelings that pop up within that landscape, that 360-degree landscape?
And something else too, I made some notes here about having that self-other distinction, and the we. I think it was Lou was a little concerned about the we thing. But I think it's good to experiment with those kind of ideas, because then you kind of learn. You can kind of see what you get some different perspectives on different aspects by sort of experimenting with that. Mm-hmm.
You're returning back to this topic of using the we, and that it's maybe not comfortable for certain, like Lou was saying, perhaps not so comfortable, but you were saying, like, even so, it's good to kind of experiment and play around with different ways of being, to know what works and what doesn't, maybe, and why.
Yeah, the we is kind of, you could see it from the perspective of the relationship, right? We're in a relationship, and there's sort of a we of the relationship, and can we speak from the we of the relationship, and what happens with that? Like, so just by playing with the different, I don't even know all these different grammatical terms, like the we, the I, the you, there's, I don't know, it's not a pronoun. I don't know what it is, but they are pronouns. Okay, they're pronouns. I was never good at grammar in school with all the terms. So it's being able to play around with those that I think it just adds some insights.
Yeah. By using we, speaking for the relationship, and how does that impact the whole dynamic, and perhaps playing around with other pronouns, I, we, you, and checking out the impact.
Yeah, it's also like there's it seems like within myself, there's also different sort of parts of myself. So are all the parts individual parts? as I parts of myself? Am I multiple I's, or am I a we? So that's like another sort of a level of, I'm sort of speaking from an I, which is a bunch of we's of myself, so, and different parts of myself can sort of talk with each other too, and have a little internal empathy circle inside of myself.
Mm. And so another way to look at it is like different, as these pronouns representing different parts of yourself, like speaking from different parts, and the we would be like multiple I's, I guess, within yourself.
Yeah, so it's something, so to kind of think about and to experiment. So, and the other thing is, I was hearing some terms of what meaning versus feelings. I'm not sure what everyone is meaning by meaning. What is meaning? What is that? And how do I sense meaning? If I'm sensing my full field of experience, what is the meaning in that? So I'm just kind of wondering what I think both you and Lou are kind of talking about meaning, and I'm trying to sort of put my finger on the experience of meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're reflecting on this kind of dichotomy between meaning and feeling, and then like what do we mean by meaning, sort of thing you're kind of asking.
Yeah, and the experience of meaning, right? It's like, if I'm sensing my field of experience, where's the meaning within my field of experience?
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, what's the maybe felt experience meaning, like
yeah,
with 360 degree, felt
yeah.
experience.
Yeah, so I'm sort of just sitting with that question. So yeah, so I feel heard.
Yeah. Okay, good. You're sitting with that question and feel heard. Lou, would you mind listening? Thanks.
Yeah.
That sort of leaves me with a lot to think about, hearing what Edwin was just saying. And yet it's hard to put into words. I think I like to think in terms of parts of ourselves, and I've always found that really actually helpful. And I know that has to have something to do with listening. So, but I'm thinking of what, so that's where I'm at.
Yeah, so you're processing, reflecting on what Edwin is saying. There's a lot to think about there. And you do relate to what he was saying about parts of self. That's you're aware of that within yourself, kind of different parts, and that's something that's been useful to you.
Yeah, it's been useful. And there's a little bit of controversy within the field. Like, some people think, or within the clinical psych field, is that recently saw a demonstration of a therapy session, and the therapist said to the person, there's actually 4 of us in the room. There's my mind, there's your mind, and then there's you and me. And he split people up like that. And I was in a group talking about this, and half the people were like, that something about that feels very wrong, like to kind of split a person from their mind and who they are. And others felt, well, I don't know, it kind of gives them the freedom to to kind of observe the way their mind's working in a way they otherwise wouldn't be able to, or it gives them some freedom, both of them. So
Yeah, so you're saying that there's some that the idea of different parts of self is an area of exploration and maybe controversy within clinical psychology, and that you recently witnessed a therapy session where the therapist was talking about the difference between mind and self, separating those two, and some people were comfortable with that and others were not.
yeah. And I don't know that I have a particularly strong opinion. I think like most things with this, it feels like so much is based on intuition and instinct, and difficult to kind of put into concrete rules or guidelines. And yet that's what would be helpful, for our task today. So
Yeah, so I think you're saying that it's difficult to talk about this kind of thing because so much of what you experience or the way that you respond to this idea of listening, whatever, is intuitive. It's intuitive, but you also recognize the value of trying to concretize it and make rules or make structures to think about it. And so you see the value in both of those things, the intuitive and the concrete.
Yeah, 100%. I feel very heard by that. And like, so there's certain instances where if I said we, like my listener would feel like, maybe, something came to mind a few moments ago and I've lost it. But there's certain moments where I might say we, and my listener might feel very kind of embraced and kind of like a loving feeling by me saying that. And there's certain times where I would say we and then be like, that's not we. I don't feel that way, or don't put words in my mouth, So, and I feel like a lot of that is based on intuition and timing and just kind of knowing. And it's hard to kind of, make rules around it, but I could see how it'd be so beautiful in certain moments and yet inappropriate in others. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you're saying that that sometimes that you're very aware that sometimes a person who's being listened to might feel very embraced and connected by saying we, and other times feel very like boundary crossed and like, no, that's you don't speak for me if you were to say we, and that it's very intuitive to sense when sense those different things would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'd be curious to hear what other people think, like if there's some way to tell other than intuition, like how to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you're curious about other people's experience of that and whether there's a way to tell, a concrete way to tell, a guidance for when a person would experience one way versus another way.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay. I'll go to Selene.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it has to do with the level of trust and connection. When there's a high level of trust and a high level of shared experience that has been verified, then it's experienced as embracing. And when it's not verified, then it's like, well, hey, you're making an assumption about me or something like that.
So you're saying you think that it's about the level of trust and connection, and that has been verified. And if it hasn't been verified, one is just making assumptions that might be totally off.
Yeah, and on that same line, I do think, so one of the values of the empathy circle, the structure of it, is that we reflect back what we think our understanding is. So we don't just make assumptions and say, well, I see we both feel this way about it. We are asking when we do the reflection, this is what I think I'm hearing. And so there is a mechanism for verification.
So you're saying that in the values and structure of the empathy circles, we reflect back what we have heard, and we ask for a reflection in the person saying, yes, I feel heard, or no, I don't feel fully heard.
Yeah, so that process of the empathy circle interrupts that thing of assuming that you understand what the other person is doing, and that's again one of the strengths of the structure, is that it interrupts a bad habit, which is assuming that we understand the experience of another person, and we are reflecting it back, so we find out if we do or not.
So you appreciate that process of the empathy circle that interrupts maybe the habit of assuming that we have understood, because we get feedback that yes or no,
yeah,
been understood.
Thanks. Got so many things to talk about that have been brought up. So I'm going to jump to this one, which is about, and it kind of relates a little bit to Shannon's thing about intuition. And that has to do with that empathy can be silent. So empathy can be nonverbal. It can be completely silent, and just by the way I'm looking at someone, they can get a sense that I'm understanding them, just that I'm being present with them and giving them my attention. Uh, and the reflecting and stuff that we do in the empathy circle verbally, if I'm doing that silently inside, like sensing their feelings and sensing their desires and stuff, but I'm not saying any of it, I'm just sensing it, that also can be very empathic. I'll stop there.
So you're looking at the topic of intuition that Shannon brought up. And one of the things in the empathy circles that is nonverbal empathy comes from the way you look at somebody, the way you're being present, the way you're giving your attention silently, and internally you are really listening to the words of the other person.
Yeah, and then there's also empathic, what I've heard Mickey Cashtan call, this is the first time I heard this phrase, empathic action, which also could be like if I'm with someone and they're experiencing great difficulty, they're telling me about something, I might just go over and sit next to them. That's an action which says I care about what's happening with you and I want to provide some support. And I haven't said that, I've said it with my action. Or I might put a hand on their back, or I might, touch, assuming that I know that it's okay with the person, or I might ask, put my arm around them. Those are actions. Yeah, so there are actions like that also that can happen without words. And sometimes the most empathic thing you can do is without words.
So you're thinking about empathic action, and you've heard Mickey Cashtan talk about this, and that you might go and put your arm around somebody or sit next to them, or maybe just a hand on the back, to indicate I'm with you, I'm present in an empathic way. So the most empathic the thing one can do sometimes could be nonverbal.
Yeah, and that's not something we really practice in the empathy circle. Although on Zoom and face to face, there is your physical presence and there is your body language, whatever you're doing with your body language and your facial expression. So those are also happening that are nonverbal. Yeah, and that nonverbal stuff doesn't come so much from conscious choice, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to smile, I'm going to look at the person. It's more just it is a natural reflection of a person's internal state. If you are feeling empathic and you are connecting with what the person's saying, the look on your face and the way your eyes are and the way your body is will be different than if you are judging the person. If you're having a lot of judgments about what they're saying and you're triggered and feeling upset by what you're hearing, your physical presence is going to be different. Yeah.
So you're looking at how in the empathy circles, we don't, especially not on Zoom, we don't practice, coming over and putting our arm around somebody or something, but your physical presence, your facial expression, are nonverbal expressions of your conscious choice to be more, to show that you are an empathic understanding with the other person, versus, for example, if you're feeling critical and judgmental, something else will be transmitted through your expressions.
Yeah, thank you. I feel very heard. And I have so much more I want to say, and my turn is over. So thanks for hearing me.
Thank you. So Shannon, would you listen to me, please?
Happy to, yeah.
So I'm kind of looking, I'm going to use a word I don't even know if you know. I'm looking through my Rolodex of memories from different empathy circles that I've been part of. Edwin's empathy circles, the wild ones, which are the cafes where you don't know who you're going to be talking to, and then the others where I have had an experience of these folks over, say, 3 or 4 weeks. I'll pause there.
You're looking through the Rolodex of memories of empathy circles, whether they be, Edwin's empathy circles or the cafes, kind of more wild setting, or the ones that you've had hosted, I guess, that have extended over 3 weeks or so.
And how I'm feeling when I listen to somebody who maybe I'm having a lot of trouble understanding, or I'm listening to somebody who's saying things that I don't enjoy hearing, versus somebody who's saying things that, wow, I wish that we were at a real coffee shop and we could talk for hours.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I serve everybody, regardless of what's going on within me?
Mm. So as you're going through these memories, you're thinking about all the different ways that you feel that, like, sometimes when you're listening and someone's saying something that you don't necessarily want to hear, or sometimes you listen and it's someone that you actually find yourself like, wow, I almost wish we could have more time at a coffee shop, that there's such a big variety, and yet how do you serve everyone in a way?
And I think especially when I'm having difficulty understanding. I've had conversations with somebody, say a man from a very different culture, and I'm wanting to know, I don't know the difference between his first name and his last name. And so I'm starting there. What is appropriate for me to use as your name? And he'll tell me, this is the name for my family and friends. You use this other name. So he's educating me on how close and in what way I'm going to listen to this person.
Yeah. And sort of especially you're pointing to this situation where you're listening to someone who may be from a different culture, have a completely different reference point. And so needing to start by way of kind of expressing curiosity, like, how would you like me to refer to you as, if there's sort of a first name and a last name. And I don't know if I got that part quite right, but kind of starting from a place of curiosity, I think is kind of what you're saying.
It's more wanting to accommodate the speaker. I want to listen and speak in a respectful way to someone from a different culture where I don't know what the understandings are. And I don't want to be disrespectful. But I also don't know the rules. So I need some quick education.
Yeah. So you're saying it's more about wanting to accommodate and kind of respect the other person, but you kind of need some information in order to do that.
Yes. So that's a very different experience than, for example, working with somebody or listening to somebody who's more or less from, Northern Hemisphere culture, where there's some basic understandings that we aren't even aware of, and we don't need to talk about. So those are very different experiences as a listener and as a speaker also, because I'm not going to share in the same way with those two different kind of people. And I find it interesting.
Mhm. You're saying that it's very different from both speaking and listening to someone that's more or less from Northern Hemisphere culture, where certain things are assumed and don't need to be fleshed out in the conversation. So it's a profoundly different experience I'm getting.
Yeah. And I am aware of how I am perceived, that I don't know fully, but I know I'm an old white woman from the Northern Hemisphere, and the whole issue of colonialism, of my teaching somebody from Nigeria, for example, there's some sensitivity there. And there's a lot on my part, a lot of ignorance about how I'm coming across.
Mm. So what I'm picking up is, if you're speaking or listening to someone that's more or less from a culture in the Northern Hemisphere, you have a little bit more awareness about how you're being perceived. Where if it's someone from a different culture, then there's more that you have to. I think I lost that last part, but you kind of there's a lot more space for misunderstanding on your part about how they're perceiving you.
Yes, and my personal experience of that is uncertainty.
Yeah, just feeling uncertain about that. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to me, Shannon.
Thanks, Selene. Edwin, would you
Mhm.
mind listening?
Listening.
There's so many ideas, it's hard to choose which one to talk about. But I did appreciate what Selene was just saying about just like pointing to how different it is to both listen and speak to different people. I think that's what we're all kind of talking about a little bit, but Selene was, that whole 6 minutes was geared around that, like what a different experience it can be to speak and listen to different people, depending on different factors. But
Yeah, so just pointing out that it's a different experience with speaking with different listening with different people, that each person is sort of, it's a unique experience and different.
Yeah. And I don't know, my mind sort of goes to like that felt experience of speaking to certain people versus others, and that it can really actually bring different things to mind depending on who you are talking to, and maybe the presence that they bring into the room.
Yes, there's a different feeling with every person, different things arise in you, maybe different feelings with each person that you're speaking to. Something different will arise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually that's a big strength of the empathy circle, because you can, you can, like others have spoken about, you can kind of select a different listener, and thereby kind of a different part of your mind feels like it gets activated. And it does, it subtly changes kind of what you might choose to talk about or focus upon, or where you go with it. With your share.
I think you're saying there's one factor or dynamic or benefit of the empathy circle is you can have different people listen to you, and each person that's listening to you, that you're speaking to, there's a different quality in that, and you have sort of a choice of who you select. And there's that dynamic that comes up with each person, different dynamic.
Yeah, and I think it's based on presence, but I think it's also based a little bit on history of what you've come to know about the person. But I do find that there is an ease. It just spans, it really has a wide range of, like, some people, there's I don't even know if it's a kind of losing a lot of complexity just to say it's a good connection. I don't think that quite captures all of it, but for some reason, for whatever reason, it's easier to speak and listen to some people on certain days and maybe more difficult with other people on other days, but it's not necessarily always the same. So,
yeah, so it sounds like the relationship of who you're speaking to, it can change. It's just like constantly changing. Different people, it changes between different people. It can change with the same person during the day or different days. So there's a lot of factors that sort of affect the quality of the listening and speaking.
yeah. I mean, I can remember like certain times in my life where I've gravitated towards certain friends even, and I felt like such a relief to be around that person. And then there's other times where maybe the same person, it's like, well, there's something I need that, maybe that friendship there's no space for in that particular friendship, whereas it had offered relief in that area before. And so things just feel very kind of fluid in that way, I guess.
So the empathy circle where you can choose who is your listener sort of relates to with your friends, that maybe your shift sort of with what friends you're connecting with, because there's something maybe you're getting from them, each person that you kind of need or want. And it's similar, you can choose who's going to be your listener according to, you're going to have a sense of what it is that how they'll listen if it's addressing something that you're needing.
Mm-hmm. And I agree that that my mind keeps going back to intuition and to nonverbal body language as a way that it's sort of, at least for me, and maybe that I need to just speak for myself, is that's the way I sort of feel that out or answer those questions for myself. It's very much in a different kind of nonverbal realm. And yeah, non-logical sort of realm. It's kind of like water, like you pour water into like a, an uneven surface, and it just kind of fills the cracks in ways that, it just sort of makes sense at the moment, and you don't need to kind of explain all the ins and outs for why. So
yeah, so who you're choosing to be your listener or your friends is more of an intuitive matter. It's not like a logical decision. It's more of maybe a felt intuitive decision that you can sort of feel what's needed.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just end by saying, I think that that's particularly true. The more of a fight or flight or emergency kind of state one gets into, the more that becomes based on like intuition and like like an emergency type feeling. And that if you're relatively even keeled, it doesn't, maybe less so. I'll just put it that way.
So if you're in sort of a fight or flight, feeling fear, anxiety, that the intuition plays a bigger part than if you're just on an even keel, feeling sort of settled.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe,
you.
perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Selene, can I speak to you? Yeah, that part where I know how people will reflect me in the empathy circle. I have sort of a sense, and there's two dynamics. One is like, oh, I'd really like that person to reflect me because I know the experience will be a better experience. It'll kind of be the feelings will be kind of more pleasant feelings. So I do have that sense.
So you have a sense of knowing how people will reflect you in empathy circles, and you're kind of drawn to those who you believe are going to reflect your feelings most accurately.
But that also, there's two. It's like, oh, I like that person to reflect back. But then I also weigh it with, oh, who hasn't spoken? So a sense of fairness. So even if the person will not give me that really great empathic reflection, I'll choose them for a sense of fairness. Like, hey, I want the person to be involved. So it's kind of like competing values, I guess.
So you've noticed that sometimes you may want to choose somebody you think will reflect you accurately, but you choose somebody else out of sense of service to want to include them and give them a chance, a time to reflect.
Yeah, I want to give them equal time. And then there's also, as a facilitator, I'll choose someone who I know might struggle with the listening. And I know that if I speak to them, because I have more experience than maybe other people, I'll be able to navigate their struggles and sort of support them in their listening. You know, I'll know how to say just very short comment, get a reflection, and sort of help teach them how to listen better, so that they'll be able to participate more effectively in the circle.
And sometimes as facilitator, you will deliberately choose someone you think that might have more difficulty with the listening and reflecting back in order to help them, rather than in trying for you to get your best listening experience.
Yeah, and specifically, I can simplify the concepts that I'm saying, like just say a simple, and I try to share a feeling, a felt experience, because that's easier to reflect. So I'll make it simple, you know, have it be a simple feeling that I'm sharing, and it's something easy for them to reflect. So, you know, I try to support them in that way.
And one of the ways that you do this is to simplify concepts and also share a felt experience, because you find that that's easier for people to reflect. And you also might simplify the way that you express yourself in order to help the listener.
And then sometimes there's some people who are very Northern, or American oriented, who haven't like maybe traveled or something, or, you know, been around a variety of people, and they get into these complicated concepts that they're sharing. And it's like, I cringe. It's like, oh my God, this person that they're speaking to just doesn't have any clue of what they're talking about. Because the more abstract you get, it's harder for the person to reflect back. And I kind of cringe when I see that.
And something that is hard for you to witness is some people who maybe don't have a very broad world experience, and when they talk, they're saying some complicated thoughts that you have a sense that the person from the other culture is not going to be able to grasp, because it's too complex. Then you're finding that simplicity and feelings are easier for a listener.
Yeah, and it's that cringe, like, oh my God.
Right. And that feeling of cringing, of kind of pain for the listener.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I'd wanted to mention in terms of, you know, we talked about the we of self, is one person. I remember once we did sort of a role playing where someone would, they had pain, where they'd have a creative idea. They had a lot of self-judgment for the idea, and then they would feel pain, so they didn't want to have creative ideas. So there's this dynamic. This kind of came up in the circle. And then we decided, well, we'll do role play. I'll be the person's creativity, someone else will be the judgment, and then someone else will be the pain. And that person just watched these parts of themselves have a dialogue with each other. And so that's, again, the we, right? It's like their we, the different parts of themselves were actually dialoguing, and we spent 45 minutes doing that, sort of working it out. And they got a lot from seeing that their own internal dialogue sort of acted out.
You're telling about an experience you had that where a group of people role played different aspects of one of the participants' experience. So they had a creative idea out of pain, I think you said, and then they were judging themselves for their creative idea. And the different people in the circle role played those different aspects, and it was very successful. It was a good
really
experience
well
for everybody.
Yeah, thank you. I feel very heard.
Thank you, Edwin. Lou, would you please listen to me?
Yes, listening.
So when I first came to the empathy circles, which is I think about 11 months ago, I noticed my NVC training habit, my nonviolent communication habit of always what we call the connecting request. I say something and then I check that how the other person understands. Is that right? Did I get it right? Is that, you know, checking all the time. And it took me a while to let go of that and stop saying that.
Yeah, so when you first started doing empathy circles, when you were the listener, you found yourself always asking the question, did I get that? Is that right? Which you learned from your nonviolent communication training. And it took you a long time to relax into not doing that.
Yeah, and I wasn't just the training I received. I've taught this stuff all over the world to thousands of people. Remember the connecting request. And it's very valuable, I think, in maintaining a connection in a conversation and finding out when I'm off track. And that is something that in the empathy circles, that check kind of is absent. And sometimes I think that somebody's saying, yes, I feel fully heard, but it's not really true. And it's a little painful moment there.
Yeah, so you've taught nonviolent communication lots of places all over the world and for a long time, and you really understand the value of that connecting request, that checking in of, am I getting you? And so you see that that has a lot of value. And the listener doesn't do that in empathy circles. And you're wondering if, well, you've definitely witnessed times when the person says, the speaker says, I feel heard at the end of their turn, but you question whether they really do. And that's a very painful moment for you when you think they're saying they feel heard, but you don't think they are.
Yeah. And as I listen to you, I realize that as I review my working life, and I think I've done this in cultures where nobody would say, no, you didn't get me, you white woman, from the United States, they wouldn't do that. It would be considered rude, disrespectful. But in the United States, my neighbor would say, absolutely not, you didn't hear me right. So I don't know what to do with that right this moment.
Yeah, so something that you're aware of from traveling around the world and teaching in lots of different cultures, other places, that there are cultures where they definitely, the norm would be that they would not tell you if you didn't get them. They would never do that. And that's really different than American culture where, of course, people will tell you right away, no, you didn't get me. And you're not quite sure what to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to find a way to make it comfortable for folks in the empathy circle so they don't leave feeling like they were pretending and there's something left unfinished. That's something I would like.
Yeah, so you'd like to figure out how to deal with those situations where the person's not feeling heard, but they're not really willing to say that. And you'd like to figure out how to respond to that, what to do about that. Because it's painful when you see people not being heard and in your estimation, like going away without really feeling heard or pretending that they felt heard.
And I've done it also. And I don't, I like to be truthful. And in those moments that it's like there isn't time, or the structure doesn't, I don't feel the freedom to say something like, I'd really like to understand better what you said. Would you repeat it? I know the timer has gone off and somebody else is waiting to speak, but I want to get you. I haven't found a way to deal with those moments.
Yeah, so you'd really like to find a way to deal with those moments. You've had moments yourself where you have not felt heard, but you've said that you've kind of pretended that you have, because there isn't time or space to go in to try to create more understanding. And the last thing you said, I think you were saying from the position of facilitator, where you were seeing that listening's not happening, and you want to be able to say, well, let's take the time to make sure that listening's happening, but you don't feel comfortable, or you haven't felt comfortable doing that. You're not sure what to do with those moments.
Thank you. I feel fully heard, and I'll give you the solution next time.
Okay. All right. I'll talk to Edwin.
Listening.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about cultural differences. And so my experience of doing circles with people who come from other cultures, particularly cultures where it would be very rude or impolite to say, no, you're not getting me, is that they are reluctant to do that at first. And then after participating in the circle a while and seeing how other people do that, say, no, you're not really understanding me, they warm up to the idea of doing that.
So you find that people maybe from different cultures where they would see it rude as saying, no, you didn't hear me, that in the circle after time, they see how that others are doing it and they sort of learn that, and then they start doing it themselves.
Yeah, and I have seen, there's something very positive about focusing on the positive and not criticizing the other person. Like I've seen people try to find something in what the reflector has said that they can agree with, I think that's a very positive instinct. And I think the way I respond when I see someone not being heard is, rather than focusing on the listener and saying, well, you're missing this, just focus on the speaker and say, I'm also hearing this. Is that what you wanted to be heard for? And so it's a way of adding and creating clarity. I think that's a way to do it.
So instead of criticizing the listener for maybe not having heard the person accurately, that you'll actually listen to the speaker. You'll reflect back the piece that was missing, that the speaker, that the listener didn't catch. So you see that, and that's sort of a positive way of doing it.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say about cultural differences is, and this also comes from my training in nonviolent communication, the idea that, all human beings share the same basic needs, for like respect and belonging and acceptance and connection and beauty and, the various basic human needs, and that our cultures are the ways in which the norms and the activities, the behaviors in which we seek to get those needs met. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so from NVC, that you're addressing what you learned there, that there is this common needs that people have, and that the culture is more of a way of getting those needs met. And so there's that deeper needs level that we all have in common, whatever culture we're coming from.
And so even though I might not understand someone's cultural practices, their cultural norms, I do have confidence that I understand like the basic needs underneath it. And I might make a mistake about their norms, but reaching through that to kind of acknowledge basic human needs, gives me confidence. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, so having that understanding that there's these foundational needs that everyone has. You may make a mistake with some of the cultural norms, but you have a sense of confidence that you maybe can connect with them by connecting to their needs that are universal to you, with everyone.
And I do think, I'm not saying that cultural norms should be ignored. Those are important, and knowing about them is good. But uh, but I and so I do attempt to do that. But I also, um, even people within the same culture are going to have differences in the way that they embrace parts of their culture or embrace parts of other cultures. So you never know what someone's individual norm makeup is going to be. So I know I'm going to make mistakes, and I know I have to find out about that particular person. And yeah, so yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of, we're in a particular cultural moment where there's a lot of judgment about people. Like, if you don't understand me, you didn't get my norms right, you should be ashamed of yourself, or there's something wrong with you. But the things that I've been describing help me not feel so guilty about that. Because I don't think that that's really very helpful.
So there's maybe cultural differences, but even within a culture, there's different norms and different maybe subcultures, and so there's a lot of judgment out in the society now. Hey, if you don't get my cultural norms or my subculture right, there's a lot of judgment about that. And it sounds like you don't get sort of caught up in that because you see that deeper common humanity that you don't kind of that you try to connect to, and or that those deeper needs that we all have, so you don't get so guilty feeling about not
Well,
getting
and
it
hearing you
right.
reflect that back to me, I realize I try to do that. I'm
You
still
try.
scared. I'm still scared of being of being judged, but it does give me some. It helps me relax more and uh, not judge myself for
uh,
it,
yeah, there's still
and
some
try to stay connected with the human being that's in front of me.
Yeah, you still do feel some judgment that maybe comes up, but this is a way to really try to stay in connection with people that are in front of you.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel heard.
Okay, well, I'll speak back to you then. Yeah, that's the same for me. Is whoever the person is it's just, I think I actually started that in the first circle we did here. It's just that common humanity. Just saying that people are pretty much the same. There is that common needs or values or underlying feelings that people have, and that really helps orientate me too with in kind of any situation. So feel very similar to what you're saying, Lou.
Yes, you resonated a lot with what I was saying about people's common humanity and a common set of basic needs, and that really helps you connect with people.
And part of that came from just years of travel. So, after high school, I went and just traveled around the world for many years. And it was like, wow, these people are pretty much the same all over. There's just these underlying human qualities that everyone has. So I think that really affected me too. I mean, kind of brought me to that awareness.
Yeah, so the truth of that people there is a common set of human needs, and that people are very similar across cultures. That isn't just theory for you. You did a lot of traveling around the world, and you really kind of learned that from your experience about how common we are.
Yeah, the other thing that's coming up for me is the dialogic, how we dialogue with each other, and internal dialogues, and that I think that's what the empathy circle is. It's just a structure to hold those dialogues. And it seems there's something about the dialogues that's how we sort of learn or grow or something. It's like core to being a human is just the dialogic quality of human beings.
Yeah, so another aspect of humanity that you're reflecting on is, or that you're saying you understand, is about dialogue, that seems to be a natural human process, and it's a process by which we connect with each other and learn and grow is through dialogue. And so you think the empathy circle supports that. It provides
Yeah.
structure for that.
And it's an internal dialogue that we have too, or that that I see, that there's these different parts of ourselves and they're sort of like in dialogue. So dialogue is like core to the human endeavor, and the empathy circle is just a little, training wheels for how to have, keep the dialogue going, so that there all those blocks that can block that, that dialogue kind of get it creates a structure to kind of support that dialogue and kind of inhibit a lot of the blocks.
Yeah, so you're saying that you see dialogue everywhere. There's dialogue internally. We have dialogue internally with parts of self, and then dialogue externally. So you just see dialogue everywhere, which is part of what makes you think it's just part of the way human beings function. And that you think that the empathy circle is a very good tool for supporting dialogue because it interrupts some of the things that block dialogue, the habits that block dialogue.
Yeah, and the other thing is Mickey wasn't the only one that used empathic action. I've been using that for over 10 years, so I don't know. So for me, it came out just seeing the arc of a conflict mediation, where people are in conflict. If you get them into dialogue, empathic dialogue, there's an unraveling of the conflict, and then there's a question of what do we do, and that's also a dialogue. What is the action that we're going to take together? And that's a negotiated dialogue again. So that's kind of where I was seeing the empathic action comes out of a negotiated dialogue.
Yeah, so empathic action which is a term that I mentioned that I heard from Mickey Kashtan. You've been aware of that term and using it for a long time, for at least 10 years. And for you, it was in the context of the arc of conflict resolution, that there's dialogue about the conflict, and then when that gets kind of more resolved or understood, there's dialogue around what kind of action do we want to take going forward. And that's what you were referring to when you say empathic action.
Yeah. And so I do see that part doesn't get, usually it's like, hey, people are saying, empathy is, people understand each other. And then that's kind of it. And then got to go to compassion or whatever, and that's action. And I don't see that. Like a lot of times the compassion is sort of a feeling sorry for someone, then you go do something for them. And it's not necessarily a negotiated agreement of what's going to be kind of helpful for you. So the empathic dialogue is like, hey, what do you need this? No, I don't really need that. But this would be work. But okay, I can help with a little bit of that, but I can't do it all because I've got time. So there's a whole empathic negotiation. You got to be able to hear each other to negotiate those steps.
Yeah, so you're really just explaining more that empathic action, or the dialogue that's involved in working out what would be mutually satisfying actions for people who have been in conflict, is a process where you negotiate. You say, this is what I would like. Oh, can I do that? Well, I can do a piece of it. And so you kind of go back and forth and you work out what will work for everyone, as opposed to some other kind of resolution, problem solving, where someone just decides on their own, oh, I think this will be good and I'll do that, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. And that you think of that more as compassion and empathic action involving dialogue. It has that really important element of having dialogue in it.
Yeah, I feel very heard. Thanks, Lou.
Okay. I'll go to Shannon.
Sure.
Such a rich conversation. Okay, so I want to talk a little about parts of self, because what Edwin was describing, this is also something that I relate to strongly and I think is a very powerful tool, is the idea of parts of self inside, and what Edwin was describing of parts of self, parts of a person dialoguing being role played and dialoguing. That's a practice called voice dialogue. There's actually work that's been done in that area and books written about it. And in the leadership training that I do, we teach that. We teach a model of internal parts of self and having them do empathic dialogue with each other.
Mhm. So you're kind of wanting to talk about this concept of there being parts of self and dialogue among those parts of self, because that's actually something that's come up in a training that you're doing where it's called voice dialoguing and different parts of the self dialogue with one another. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the what we do is based on I think it's Eric Berne, uh, um, uh, where there's a critical voice and an empathic voice or a nurturing voice, and then a child voice, a free child voice that's, and then an adaptive child voice, which is the scared child, that's been hurt, and so and a person may identify other voices that they have inside also. But yeah, becoming aware of those voices, the messages that they give you, the beliefs that they hold about you and about the world, and what they need, those are all an important part of that dialogue process. Yeah.
Mhm. And so you're thinking it started with Eric Burns, and it concerns actually four parts of the self, kind of two child parts, an adaptive and a free child self, and then a critical self, and there was one other one,
Nurturing.
nurturing self.
Yeah.
And it's about kind of creating dialogue among those four parts of self. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually there's a fifth part, which is the adult, which is a observing part of self that can recognize that the other voices are there and make decisions about which ones to listen to, or which ones to get help for.
Mm. So the adult makes the adult self, the fifth one, kind of makes decisions about which voices to listen to of the other four that are there.
Right, and has perspective.
Mhm.
What else do I want to say? So Edwin asked before about meaning. What does it mean to listen for meaning? And I would say what I'm listening for. Actually, did I start the timer? I didn't. Look at that. Okay. Yeah, and I would say listening for meaning for me means asking myself, why is this important to them? Or why, what desire or value are they expressing, by focusing on this? I think that's what listening for meaning means to me.
Mhm. So you're going back to a question that Edwin asked about what does it mean to listen for meaning? And you were saying that what you mean when you talk about that is kind of asking yourself when someone's speaking, why is this important to them, what they're saying, and what value is underneath it, maybe, or what value is being expressed.
Yeah, and another thing I'm aware of is, so I was trained as a filmmaker. I went to film school at UCLA, and part of training in theater and directing, writing, is asking about characters. What is the motivation of a character? Why does a character do what they do? And that everything a character says or does is somehow an expression of what's inside them, like what. And so I think that training also helps me to see how people are, how they're feeling, and what's important to them.
So you're a filmmaker and was trained at UCLA to do this, and part of the art of it sounds like of this is kind of focusing on characters and character development, and asking yourself, like, what is the primary motivation underlying or undergirding this character's actions, and that tends to lead to a broader understanding of each character,
Right.
their actions and their expressions.
So that process of listening to someone, what they say and what they do, what their facial expressions are, their body language, and the actions that they take, all communicate some kind of meaning. There's some kind of meaning in them, and that the practice of, and so I've had a lot of practice in doing that, in observing that and making meaning out of it. And the meaning I make might not be accurate. That's why you have to check, because it might not be accurate. But yes, but that's where that information comes from.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're zeroing in on or sensitive to the listeners, nonverbal body language and how they're listening, how they're acting, and that says a lot about how they're motivated, or you imagine it does, but you're careful not to jump to conclusions without checking it out with them first.
Yeah, and my time is up. I'm just saying one other thing, which is I'm also very aware that the more I know about myself, my own motivations, my own feelings, my own desires, the more I'm aware of that, the more I'm able to sense it in other people.
Mm. So that you've also come to understand that the more you know about yourself, kind of the more able you are to sense motivation in others.
Thanks. I feel heard.
Yeah, sure. Selene, would you be my listener?
You mean
Yeah, that's right.
I got it. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm here.
I don't know that I have something readily that's coming to mind right now to speak about. So much has been said that seems valuable. It's almost like I'm hard pressed to find something that is not connected to empathy in the empathy circle in some way, because there's so much that is connected, and the question is only becoming now, like, what's most core and what's tangentially or peripherally connected to it. Yeah.
So you're looking for what you want to explore next, and you're hard pressed to find something that's not connected to empathy regarding the empathy circles. So what else is like core in this that you might look at and
Yeah.
talk about?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I'm always fascinated, I've kind of talked about this before, is like, almost if we come from the standpoint, which I think Edwin does a really nice job kind of speaking to, which is if we come to the standpoint that we're naturally connected, then it becomes a question, not what is empathy or how does it happen or what is the empathy circle, but the question is like, what's going on when it's not possible? Like, what's going on when someone's talking and I literally can't like encode what they're saying because, for whatever reason, and, you observe it with others too. And like, or what's going on when there's thought blocking in some way and like there's not like accessible material. And so those are the moments that I like gravitate towards, of like, why does it shut down if this is something everybody wants, which I think it is, why, when and why does it shut down in those moments?
So you're looking at the empathy circles starting from the point of view that we are already all connected. And so you're wondering what happens when the connection is not happening. when it's not possible, when there's thought blocking. When does that happen and why? And what is underlying that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes I'll think to myself, like, you know, why is this person being so mean? Or, you know, or why am I, yeah, sometimes that'll occur to me. And if I think long enough about it, I'll realize, wait a minute, their feelings were hurt by me, and they were kind of lashing out. Or I'll realize, you know, oh, they did tell me that they were dealing with this family situation recently. Or, you know, it'll come to mind like, oh, there's a good reason why people behave the way that they do. And so yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that, but I think the empathy circle is helpful in like giving people the benefit of the doubt that let's just listen. Let's just hang with this person a moment, you know. There, I guess that's sort of what I'm getting to. Yeah.
So sometimes you'll hear somebody say something back to you and you're wondering, why are they being mean? And your feelings are hurt, or did you hurt their feelings? Or you remember, oh, they already told me they're dealing with such and such. And so you realize there's a good reason for it. And for their words that were maybe painful. And I heard you say that the empathy circles, in that, we kind of give people the benefit of the doubt. Just listen without knowing.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, yeah. And I think forgiveness does play a role in the empathy circles. I think it plays a big role because there are many times where you're not heard perfectly. And I don't know that I have a strong stance on, no, it's important you always correct the person, or no, it's important that you forgive them and just try to be gentle. I'm not sure. But I know that in both cases, there's some forgiveness that goes into it on the speaker's part. You know, there's some kind of a common understanding, like, all right, well, that wasn't perfect, but we're going to work through it, you know? So I feel like I feel like that's pretty omnipresent with every empathy circle I've been in. There's slack that we give each other. And I think that's awesome, actually. I think that's a really good thing to be a part of, giving that and receiving it. Yeah.
So you feel that forgiveness plays a big role in empathy circles, because there are times when, I didn't get heard, and I give the person slack. It's okay. And there's kind of a common understanding that if this happens, and it's okay. And there's an allowance of forgiveness and an allowance.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel heard.
Thank you. See, Edwin, would you listen to me, please?
Listening.
So now I'm bringing solutions to the questions that we asked earlier.
You want to bring some solutions for questions that we've asked?
Yes. So, so one of the things that we talked about earlier, and I just wanted to reiterate that in addition to the words that are being spoken and heard in an empathy circle, there is that maybe larger influence of attention and presence that is also being exchanged.
So besides just the words that are being exchanged, there's this quality of presence and attention that's there.
Yes. And I wondered if we looked at the possibility of facilitators learning how to model when they're not being fully heard. in saying something, well, I want to repeat this piece, it's so important to me, or some way to give folks a modeling of how to handle when they haven't been fully heard.
So you're thinking that there might be some way to have facilitators learn how to model when they haven't been really deeply or fully heard, and by modeling that others would see that and learn from that.
Yes, and to make that part of the training, because I've heard this issue come up before, and I have not heard kind of solutions to it, and so I'm curious about looking at it and as something that facilitators can learn to do skillfully.
So I think I'm hearing that that people feeling heard, deeply heard, is very important to you, and you're looking for ways of addressing that, because and it's also come up in some of the circles where people haven't felt heard, and you want to create looking for some way for facilitators to learn that. And
yeah, and it's not so much deeply heard as accurately heard. I think that the deeply is kind of another step. But yeah, to at least to go for some level of accuracy.
So it's really about accuracy that you're looking at. Just there's going deeper is another step, but just how do you really hear people accurately?
So that the speaker, as we say, is satisfied that I have been. We use the word fully heard. That's pretty good. Deeply is, another level, not necessarily needed, but accuracy, I think, is a good standard.
Yeah, so accuracy is a good standard. I have been accurately heard.
And another thing I wanted to say is that as the listener, we're choosing what and how we reflect. And earlier, I heard between Edwin and Lou that Edwin used humor. I'm missing right now what it was you said, but you made it maybe self-deprecating humor in that moment. And Lou reflected back what you said without the humor. And I really enjoyed that choice. Why? I think for me, in terms of deep values and needs, it was reflected the need for care.
So in the reflection, we sort of have a choice of how we reflect. And I said something that had a quality of humor to it, and Lou just reflected back sort of the essence of it, or without the humor. And there was a quality of care in there that you appreciated in his reflection.
Yes, and so I think as we are motivated by the values of the empathy circles, it can help us choose how we reflect someone and how we decide in that instant that we have how I'm going to reflect, because I am holding the value of respect and of care and mutuality and so on.
So the values that you have when you do your reflection are influencing the listening. So if you have a sense of care and you're reflecting with that care, that sort of influences the listening, that the value you're holding.
I think I'm thinking of offering myself as the empathy circle sermonizer But that's next time. My time is up now. Thank you, Edwin. I feel fully heard.
Yeah, you're going to take on the role of empathy circle sermonizer, giving your sermons about how to do empathy circles.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
reflected with humor.
Yes.
Okay, well, we just have 9 minutes, so maybe a quick debrief. And we've done 3 circles. I don't know if you want to do another one, or if I hadn't thought of doing a whole series. I'm really enjoying it, so it's been very insightful. But I don't want to put anyone out with in terms of doing more. So this was sort of an experiment for me, and I just find it very interesting. I'm learning a lot. So I don't know what everyone else's experiences or thoughts are. I'll just jump in.
Well, I learn a lot also, and I find it also very interesting. And in many ways, one is what each of you says, and then another is watching the conversation and where it goes and how it winds around and comes to some juicy places. So it's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, I agree. I feel there some days I'm able to track the themes more than others, but there's always so much that comes up. So it just feels very rich and yeah, and it feels like it's all kind of very connected, and yet I don't know, yet we cover kind of like a lot of ground. So yeah.
And I would say I'm enjoying it a lot too. I think I'm learning stuff and also clarifying some of my own thinking about things that I've observed. It's definitely fun to have a place to talk about things that I know I've witnessed or felt or observed over time. That sometimes I've talked about some of those things in the trainings that we've done, and sometimes in the Friday support groups, but not necessarily all of those things. So it does feel good to talk about those things and also to check my experience with other people's experience and hear the experiences of others, that are different than mine. I really like that. So, I mean, I'd be willing to do another circle.
Okay.
I
would too. Oh,
yeah.
Shannon.
I was just going to say, I have one more thing I wanted to say, which is about what Shannon was talking about when she spoke last about why people behave the way that they do. And so there's an aspect of like what I think these days is being called trauma-informed whatever, which is developing an awareness of how people have been hurt and how those hurts and the results of that unresolved trauma, how that plays into how they might be reacting in the moment. And I think that facilitators being aware of that for themselves and actually how to work with that, strategies for coping with that, and then also being aware of why people in the circle might be reacting the way that they do is helpful for staying out of judgment of people for responding in a particular way. I think that so that'd be an area worth talking about some more.
Yeah.
I mean that again, here's a place where the structure of the empathy circle stops that. So how people might respond, hey, you can't say that to me, or whatever, however they might respond because they don't like what the person's saying. The structure of the circle stops that because you're not allowed to do that. You're just supposed to reflect back what you're hearing. And then there's space that happens and people get a chance to relax and process what happened. But a trauma-informed, that information also helps people stay out of their judgments about how other people are responding or stay in empathy for it. Anyway, I'm sorry, I said a lot there.
My mind keeps going to the rupture repair model, which is like anytime there's a I think it could go, I think it could go with what you're saying. Maybe it doesn't, but I hear it as going where whenever there's a withdrawal or a confrontation, there's been a negative turn in the alliance. And so from that standpoint, like, I think that the empathy circle is awesome and that it sets up a structure by which that's less possible, but yet also it kind of highlights it when it does happen. He's just like, well, uh-oh, what happened? Like that was only a one-word reflection, or that person didn't even take their turn to speak. Something's going on. Or it's much more obvious. You have like a confrontation. So I would love to talk about that. And I have less experience as a facilitator, but it seems like it would be a lot to hold in mind at the same time.
Well, I sounds like we have a lot of things to keep talking about. I have some ideas too. It's like there's some. For me, it's the exploration of the felt experience in an empathy circle and an awareness of the felt experience. That's like something I'm wanting to keep exploring, and so sounds like we have a couple things to talk about in the next time. So in 2 weeks. I don't know, Selene, you have something to talk about still? So some areas.
I'll find something. You'll get my sermon. Don't worry.
Okay. So 2 weeks, the same time slot, just
Sure.
a commitment for one more time. We'll just take it from there.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I'm enjoying it and look forward to
Thank you.
continuing the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks
everyone.
everybody.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a good rest of the day.
Bye-bye.